Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Romeo and Juliet. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Act 4, Scene 1. This is a very important scene because this is the moment where Juliet, in her desperation, seeks the help of Friar Lawrence, and they, of course, concoct the plan that is the beginning of the end. So let's get started. So as always, let's start with a quick plot summary. Act 4, Scene 1 begins in Friar Lawrence's cell, where we get to observe a conversation between Friar Lawrence and the Count of Paris. And they are, of course, talking about when Juliet and Paris are going to get married, and Friar Lawrence asks some questions about why it's so hasty, and they talk about, you know, her grief for Tybalt and what Capulet feels. And then the decision is, you know, given to Friar Lawrence that they are, of course, getting married on the Thursday, which is so very, very quick. Juliet arrives at the scene, and there is an incredibly awkward conversation between Paris and Juliet, all full of double meanings about their upcoming marriage and the preparation that they're doing. Eventually, Paris leaves Juliet alone with Friar Lawrence so that she can pray with him, because that's quite a good way of getting rid of him, saying that she's there to, you know, to pray and get absolution and such before they get married. But of course, what she really wants to talk to Friar Lawrence about is the horrific situation that she now finds herself in. And again, we get that suicidal impulse coming through, where she quite strongly tells the friar that she wants to die, because obviously her choices on this mortal plane are pretty terrifying at this moment. You know, her options are damning herself by having to marry twice, or so she's going, well, I may as well damn myself via suicide. But the friar basically says, well, if you're willing to commit suicide, then you're probably willing to take some other risks. So how about you take this one? How about you take this potion? And that this potion is something that's going to make you seem dead for 42 hours. And then he basically says, well, during this time, I'll tell Romeo what's going on. Then the two of us will come and get you from your tomb, because you'll be popped in a tomb. And then we can get everything sorted and we can reunite you with Romeo. And she's like, oh, okay. Yeah, all right. I'll do that. That sounds like a good plan. Okay. And so off she goes to tell her father that, you know, yeah, fine, we'll get married, knowing that she's got this get out clause. Okay, so let's have a little look at this first section where the friar and Paris have a conversation. So Friar Lawrence questions, well, the time is very short, which is quite interesting, actually, that he feels that he can sort of almost be a little bit judgmental here. It suggests a certain level of his power in this situation. Note that Paris perhaps name drops a little bit. Father Capulet will have it so. Notice the way that he's sort of saying to the friar, well, look, we're already married. He's already my dad. So there's quite a lot of weight behind that statement, saying, well, you know, this is what he has said. I am nothing slow to slack his haste, so I'm not gonna stop him from wanting to, like, get things moving. And the Friar Lawrence makes a really, really good point. He says, well, you do not know the lady's mind, uneven as the course, and I like it not. So, you know, he's making the point here. It's not just about the fact that this is happening in 3 days' time. No, you've not even wooed the lady. So again, reminding us of the haste and the kind of impulsiveness of this decision. And Paris gives a sort of description of why, and he says, immoderately she weeps for Tybalt's death. So this adverb of manner here, immoderate, suggests that she, in his mind, is crying too much. Now, is there too much grief when one of your family members has died? No, it's not the most sympathetic response. But of course, dramatic irony times, we the audience know that her tears are not immoderate, because she's not just crying for the death of Tybalt, she's crying for everything else, for her loss of Romeo, Romeo's banishment, the predicament that she's in. But this is how he justifies, therefore have I little talked of love, for Venus smiles not in a house of tears. So he's saying, look, you know, this personification of Venus not being able to smile, you know, sort of goddess of love, can't be smiling and making its way when there is so much grief. So he sort of gives his reason. And he says, now, as her father counts it dangerous that she doth give her sorrow so much sway, and in his wisdom haste our marriage to stop the inundation of her tears. So you've got this metaphor of a flood of tears. He's basically saying, well, you know, Capulet doesn't think that it's safe for a young girl like her to just be alone and cry. So this is his idea. Note again, you've got, just like it was my father Capulet, now we've got in his wisdom. So we've got this flattery. Friar Lawrence, oh, here we've got one of these brilliant little moments, the aside. Asides are dramatic devices that allow a character to speak their minds out loud, but without any of the other characters on stage listening. So it's a direct reflection of what's going on up here, just for the audience's benefit. And he says, I would I knew not why it should be slowed. So the friar's like, oh God, this is awful. It's almost saying, I wish I wasn't a part of it. Like, I wish I didn't know, you know, I wish I wasn't a part. I wish this hadn't happened. So it's a reminder of the sort of horror and difficulty of this situation. Oh, Paris and Juliet. We get a little bit of typical Juliet here, using her wit and her intellect to be able to, on the spot, respond to Paris in a way that he kind of needs to hear, but without feeling like she's betraying Romeo. Paris says, happily met my lady and my wife. Okay, so note the way that he immediately calls her his wife, even though they're not yet married. So that sort of presumption. And look at the double meaning. Juliet says, that may be, sir, when I may be a wife. So note that she's using these modal verbs that suggest not improbability, but uncertainty. And the fact is, the double meaning comes, she's saying, oh yeah, well, when I can be a wife, when I may be a wife, i.e. once I've been to the friar and done my prayers, then I'll be able to be a wife, and I will. But of course, we know that she actually means when I'm able to be a wife, I'm not married to Romeo, because she cannot be his wife when she's already somebody else's, because that is bigamy. Paris says, well, that may be, must be. So he takes this modal verb of uncertainty, repeats it, and then shifts it to a modal verb of certainty. That may be, must be love on Thursday next. So he's saying, no, well, that's going to happen. Certainly, it's going to happen on Thursday. And then she shifts around. Well, what must be, shall be. So again, to Paris, that sounds like she's saying, okay, yep, you're right, that will happen on Thursday. But really, this is a kind of statement full of like fate, or the impact of fate. She's basically saying, well, yeah, whatever will happen, come what come may. So we're reminded here of the power of fate. Skipping ahead until their farewell, so that this conversation continues in this way. Paris says, God shield that I should disturb devotion, because she's obviously saying, well, I need to pray with Father Lawrence. You know, she needs that sort of holy time. And so he's like, oh goodness, no, I wouldn't get in the way of that. Juliet, on Thursday early will I rouse you, will I wake you. Till then, adieu, and keep this holy kiss. Now, that metaphor of the holy kiss, probably in this moment, makes you do this. He's very, he's very innocent in all this. This isn't his fault. But of course, we're reminded of the religious language that was used in those early scenes between Romeo and Juliet, where they spoke to each other in sonnet form. Palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss. And so the sort of purity of their love being expressed through that religious lexis. So the fact that we see that repeated here, but between Paris and Juliet, is quite tragic, is quite devastating, especially when you then compare it with her huge reaction the moment that he leaves. Oh, shut the door, and when thou hast done so, come weep with me. Past hope, past cure, past help. Okay, no, so we've got a triad, or a list of three, whichever you prefer it. But look at the way that the first word of each of these structures is repeated. This is called anaphora. Okay, and so she's basically saying through that triad, there's nowhere for me to go. You know, it's like we're past the point of no return. There's nothing that can be done. So there's no hope, there's no cure, there's no way of helping. So poor Juliet is absolutely desperate. And that desperation is what leads, I suppose, Friar Lawrence to respond in this particular way with this plan. He says, well, if rather than to marry County Paris, thou hast the strength of will to slay thyself. So if you've got enough strength in you to commit this sin of killing yourself, then it is likely thou will undertake a thing like death to chide away this shame. So close to death, similar to death, but that will get rid of this situation that you're in, this present shame, the fact that you're about to risk marrying a second time, that copest with death himself to escape with it, and if thou dearest, I'll give thee remedy. Darest, sorry. So if she has got the bravery, the courage, if she is fearless enough to face this version of death, well then the friar will help. Now this is quite interesting because what he is suggesting here is quite shocking. The fact that he makes this plan rather than going to the two families to try and resolve the matter, perhaps tells us something about his motivations or his fear of how far embroiled in this plan he already is and what trouble he might get in. Juliet is willing to take this risk, and just have a little look at the emotion in this moment. So she says, oh, bid me leap rather than marry Paris from off the battlements of yonder tower. So like, you know, tell me to jump off this tower and I will. Note the interjection here again, so such heightened emotion. Walk in thievish ways, bid me lurk where serpents are, chain me with roaring bears, or shut me nightly in a charnel house. A charnel house is a house of death, like bones and things. Overcovered quite with dead men's rattling bones. So literally like pop me in a tomb with just bones all over me, which interestingly is quite close to where she ends up whilst waiting for Romeo. Bid me go into a new-made grave and hide me with a dead man in his shroud. All of these terrifying things in this synthetic list. Okay, so it's synthetic because it's got lots of connectives like or, okay, starting the list. So that's what makes it synthetic listing, rather than there not being a connective. So all of these thoughts in the synthetic list is, I mean, it's all full of death. She's basically listing the most terrifying things she can think of to say, I will do all of those things instead of marrying Paris. And she will do it without fear or doubt to live an unstained wife to my sweet love. So notice this metaphor here is about being unstained, uncorrupted, because she knows that marrying Paris will corrupt her, will stain her. But notice that it's in Romeo's eyes that she's talking there, not the eyes of God, to again demonstrate that strength of her love for Romeo. And so Paris suggests the plan. We won't go through it in huge detail, but we will have a little look at it. Take thou this vial. So vial is like a little potion, little bottle. Being then in bed, this distilled liquor drink thou off. Okay, so get that in you. When presently through all thy veins shall run a cold and drowsy humour, for no pulse shall keep his native progress but surcease. No warmth, no breath shall testify thou livest. The roses in thy lips and cheeks shall fade to paly ash. So note this metaphor about the roses in the cheeks. So this is an image of life and beauty and health, and it's got quite a lot of colour symbolism because it's about pinkness in the cheeks and the lips, and then that's juxtaposed with paly ashes and the windows falling like death in this simile. So she's going to go from life to seeming death by drinking back this vial. Thy eyes' windows fall like death when he shuts up the day of life. Notice the way that death is personified here. Very important for later on in the play, where we see death personified again. Each part deprived of supple government shall stiff and stark and cold appear like death. So notice that little triad or list of three. Triad of adjectives, stiff, stark and cold, all associated with a dead body, which will appear like death. And in this borrowed likeness, so in this seeming form of death, thou shalt continue 42 hours. So that's how we know, 42 hours she will be like this. And then she'll awake, as from a pleasant sleep. Oh, how lovely. Now, you can argue that Juliet should be frightened of this. This sounds terrifying. This sounds incredibly risky. What kind of potion can make someone's heart stop for a full 42 hours and then for them to wake as if nothing has happened? So we again might think about what the motivations are here with the friar. I'm not in any way suggesting that he wants to kill her, but he's willing to risk quite a lot in order to find a resolution that doesn't involve him going to the Montagues and Capulets and saying, I married your children. Whoopsie. Okay, and then final little point. Now, when the bridegroom in the morning comes to rouse thee from thy bed, there art thou dead. That was an interesting turn of phrase, though, because the last time we heard that declarative, it had a different adjective at the end. There art thou happy. So he's using quite similar sentences, declaratives, to kind of persuade. He was doing that with Romeo to kind of convince him not to be having a kind of meltdown about the fact that he had been banished. He was pointing out all the things that should have happened to him and going, there art thou happy, because his situation was better. Now he's using that kind of declarative to reassure Juliet, there art thou dead. Okay, and then this little section of the plan, Friar Lawrence is basically just explaining that Juliet will, of course, on being found dead, be transferred over to the Capulet vault where all of the dead Capulets lie. And in the meantime, he will go off, write Romeo a letter, not send someone face to face, but write Romeo a letter. So there's another level of risk there. And then he will come back to the city and the two of them together will wait for her to wake up. And this shall free thee from this present shame. Again, look at that repetition of the abstract noun shame. That's the second time he's used that when describing her situation. It's her shame because of the corruption to her soul if she is to marry Paris. He then says, this will free thee from this shame if no inconstant toy nor womanish fear abate thy valour in the acting of it. I just always question this moment, like, is this a fair thing to say to Juliet? Because it sounds almost quite judgmental. Like, inconstant toy, that suggests a sense of like fickleness, like she would be quick to change her mind. And I think, you know, we've seen that that's not the case. She's not impulsive. She thinks things through. And then he says, nor womanish fear. Well, again, she's shown herself to be fairly fearless here. So there's this little hint of judgment in Friar Lawrence's voice that always just sort of annoys me ever so slightly. So he's basically saying, don't get fickle on me. Don't wimp out, you know, don't let your womanly fears get in the way, and we'll resolve this. Again, leading me to wonder about to what lengths the friar is willing to go to in order to sort this out. Friar Lawrence starts being this absolute kind of beacon of wisdom at the beginning of the play, and by the end, there are some question marks. Final thoughts from me. Obviously, this is a scene which is about love and conflict. Almost every scene is now about love and conflict because they just go hand in hand. Also, that reminder of patriarchal power, that shift, that giving of a woman from a man, from the father to the husband. That's what's happening here. Juliet's decisions are taken out of it, and this is Capulet saying, here, Paris, I give you my daughter. And Paris is saying, thank you, I take your daughter. But even in the way that the friar commands the situation, he's a sort of version of patriarchal power in himself. Death, clearly a big scene here. Not only because they're mimicking death, but also because of that suicidal impulse that we're seeing in Juliet again, the desire to die if she's not able to be with Romeo. And again, we've got this feeling of pace, haste, speed, impulsiveness. pushing us towards the end. Everyone is acting hastily. All of the characters are now acting hastily, going against, the friar himself is going against the advice he once issued Romeo about taking his time and thinking things through. That's it from me. Hope that was useful. Thank you so much for watching. If you've got any questions, you know where to pop them in the comments and I will come back to you. If you haven't subscribed, please do so that you get notifications of when new videos are coming up. I will soon start doing some more character-based and theme-based ones to help with more generic revision for your literature exams. And of course, there are plenty of other videos that you can use to help you for all aspects of your literature and language studies. Right, that's it. Thank you so very much. Happy revising.